Hi friends, welcome to A Wonderful Sheep and welcome to my reading wrap-up video for the month of March as seen in my book journal. In March, I actually didn't work too much in my reading journal as I was reading. This cover page even, it was made at the end of the month after I'd read all my books, so I knew how many books I would have to fill in on my bookshelf page, and I just did a simple March cover page. It was clover themed, kind of for St. Patrick's Day, but also just to hint at the beginning of spring and things turning a bit green. I read quite a bit in March, as you will see later on in the flip through of my journal, because a lot of books were picture books and graphic novels and some shorter books that were easy to get through. And like I said, I didn't work too much in my reading journal. I think I was just a little burnt out from all the journaling I do. And so I adapted the reading journal spreads for the book reviews into a sort of more loose and casual style, which I'm actually really pleased with, and I might keep that up in April, I think. But I just wanted to, keep updating my journal in whatever form that I could sustain. So some months it'll be more elaborate spreads, and other months it'll be more loose and casual reviews, and all that works. Finished some books in my series tracker as well, and I'm just updating the yearly trackers in my journal before I will take you along on the flip through. Alright, and here is a flip through of my reading journal for the month of March. As usual, I have my cover page on the right and my March bookshelf on the left. I went with the clover. I have all the books I read or listened to that month with a little key for the genre and the format. And then I've kept up with the borrowed versus read list. So I start with, at the first of the month, writing down all the books I have on loan to see which books I actually get to reading or if I don't finish them. And usually, rather than DNF, I usually just don't end up starting a lot of books because I always borrow way more than I can read. Or in this case, I just, during the month, discovered new books and found other books that I wanted to read more than the ones I had on hand. And also in March, I rediscovered my local library and their English collection. So one day I went to the library and just looked through the English collection and wrote down all the books that I would like to check out in the future. So here are some of them. I actually did check out On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, but I didn't get to it, so we'll have to revisit that later. And same with This Is How You Lose the Time War. I've tried to start this so many times, I just haven't gotten into it yet. It's so short that I'm sure I'll be able to finish it, but I just have to be in the right mood to read that kind of sci-fi, I think. And then this is a new tracker that I added this month. I wanted to sort of prioritize books that were going to be returned sooner to the library, so I made a progress bar of the progress I had on the book and when it was due. So if it was like, I started it towards the end of the month, but this way I could see like, okay, I have a lot of time left on this book versus just a couple of days on this book. And hopefully the two bars would sort of converge together as like time went by and I had less time to read it. Hopefully I was making more progress on the books, and I got a good number of books finished that I hadn't finished as of when I made this tracker, but it's kind of fun. I think this tracker bar, this progress bar, was inspired by the Storygraph app. I like seeing it when I update my progress on the app, so I did a physical page as well. It's kind of fun, and I have already made this page for April. And then in March, I didn't really start these like decorative journal spreads for the books I was reading because I had read a lot and I just wasn't keeping up with my journal. So instead, I just started taking notes on a book, and that first book was The Hedgewitch of Foxhall, because it was a fiction book and there were a lot of like people, places, and creatures to keep track of because it's like Welsh mythology and during the medieval ages. So there's a lot of like new things, new words, new concepts to me, as well as like fantasy places. So I made a little mind map, and don't look too closely if you don't want to be spoiled, because there may be some spoilers with these connections. But this was actually really fun to do as I was keeping up with the book, like as I was reading the book. It made me like savor the book more and help me remember the people, places, and creatures in the book. So unfortunately, this is a standalone, so I won't need to be referencing this, but I definitely would recommend doing something like this for like a series, a fantasy series. I did it for Crescent City as well, but on my iPad. And then I wrote like down, you know, thoughts or questions I had as I was reading them. I didn't follow up with these, but I do have these questions resolved. And just some notes from a scrap piece of paper on a different book. I think this is on gingerbread, which I'll get to in a second. And I made another, just a simple page for the Kamigawa Food Detectives. Just a little note about each chapter to remind myself what the chapter, the little vignette was about, which was nice. And now we have the March reading wrap-up section. So like I said, I didn't do these individual spreads for each book because there was just too many and I was so far behind. So I printed out all the book covers and I grouped them into categories. So the order of this wrap-up is not the order in which I read the books, but rather just they're grouped in categories. So the first category is Sarah J. Maas. I finished the Throne of Glass series with the Kingdom of Ash at the very beginning of the month, and that, you know, that was a journey. And I think Throne of Glass is actually my favorite series of hers. But right after I finished Throne of Glass, I dove into Crescent City, and I finished the first two books during March, which are also, they were quite big. And Crescent City was very different from both ACOTAR and Throne of Glass since it is urban fantasy, and I had never, I think, read urban fantasy before. It was an adjustment, but she's such a good writer at like world building and stuff. So I was involved. I was invested in the story. Crescent City was like a little more like slow pace, and then all of a sudden everything happens at once at the end. It's like mind blowing, very crazy. But yeah, so the first group is Sarah J. Maas, and then I listened to Gingerbread. And this was a recommendation by my friend, and so we were both listening to it together, sort of like a buddy read. We didn't really talk about it too much after, but I summed it up as weird but good. And it's a little bit confusing. I think it's a kind of a retelling of Hansel and Gretel. I really don't know how to describe it, but it's an engaging listen. I'm glad I listened to the author narrating the story because her writing style is a little hard to follow, I think, if I was just reading the print. But since the author obviously knows how she wanted to convey the words, it was sometimes hard to follow, but also might have been easier to listen to than read. And so, like, yeah, I don't know how to describe it other than there's weird but good. The writing is really interesting, but sometimes I'd get confused as to what was happening in the plot. And then the next category is books about the magic and memories of food. So just coincidentally, I read books that like celebrated cooking and like the power of food to like bring people together and create core memories. And so Relish was a graphic novel that same friend who recommended Gingerbread told me about, and I really loved this graphic novel about the author's like memories and relationship with food and recipes. And then Kamigawa Food Detectives was a buddy read with my friend Sarah, and this was also a really cozy collection of vignettes about this detective agency of a father and daughter who run a restaurant, and they also track down like the recipes of foods that you remember from your life that were very important to you. So they like, you know, ask for the services of the detectives, and they track down and like recreate that recipe for you. So those two were really cute, cozy books. And then Boys Don't Fry was just a picture book that was also really fun about a little boy who wants to cook in the kitchen with the females in his family. And then this was just a cookbook, The Glucose Goddess Method. A Man Called Uve was actually a recommendation from one of you guys on a YouTube video. I think I asked for book recs, and someone recommended this, and I'm really glad I listened to it. I had the audiobook, and it was a very moving story, very heartwarming, and just reminds you, like, you never know what's going on in people's lives and what their background is and where they came from. And Uve is this really grumpy elderly gentleman, and you just assume he's just like a grumpy old man, and he's always been that way, but he has a whole you like go back and forth between the present day and his his life and like all the things that happened to him to sort of explain why he is the way he is, but also you get to see like underneath that gruff exterior, like the person he is underneath. And yeah, it's really good. It reminded me of the movie Gran Torino, I think, with Clint Eastwood, if I remember correctly. Sort of a similar theme to that. And then the next category is graphic novels, and I think Relish kicked off that sort of like graphic novels era. I've always wanted to get like into more graphic novels, so after reading Relish, I read something new, which is also by her, about her wedding, and this is just a picture book by her as well. And then Girlfriends by Cherie Miller and Roaming by Jillian and Mariko Tamaki were also really good. They're very different. Like this is for like young readers, and the style is very cartoony, and I loved the facial expressions, especially in this one called Friends. And then Roaming is very more like a graphic novel rather than a comic. There are lots of panels and pages where there was no words. It was just like a scene or like snapshots, like close-ups to tell the story, which was really interesting. So this is my graphic novel era. And then I mentioned The Hedgewitch of Foxhall, which is also a really fun read, kind of like very fairy tale like. And I think when I was telling my friend about it, I sort of said it was like a fantasy Fern Gully. If you remember that animation from like a long time ago, maybe the 80s, I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was made before I was born, but it's about like these like forest, what are they, fairies or something? But they like live in the rainforest or the forest, and then like the big bad logging companies come and they're like chopping down all the trees, and it's like, it's an environmental message in the movie. And there, I felt like it was like environmental message but with witches, and then there's also princes. But the main character, she is like an environmentally friendly witch. She's very close to like the nature and the forest, and she doesn't use a lot of resources in her magic, versus like the coven in her neighborhood, in her town. They just like destroy the environment to get results. And then there's another whole larger story with the two princes that are involved. And yeah, it was a fun read. And then I went and finally read Steal Like an Artist, which is a fun little book about cultivating your creative voice and practice, and like being a creative. And I've been meaning to read this forever, and I finally got to. But I think more than what I got out of this book is I really enjoyed looking through his blog and like all of his offerings online, like reading about his writing and like his journal pages and zines and stuff on his blog was really interesting. So that's a whole resource I'd like to explore further. And then I have the rom-coms grouped together. Favorite from this was definitely The Partner Plot by Kristina Forrest. I really loved the first book. It's not technically a series because you don't have to read them in order. They're all standalones, but the first book was The Neighbor Favor, and that takes place in New York City, and the two main characters are Nick and Lily, and they're both like book lovers. It's like a bookish, like if you love reading about bookish people, you'll love that book, and it's a really lovely, wonderful love story. So since I loved The Neighbor Favor so much, I wasn't sure how I'd feel about The Partner Plot, because after the first book, I wasn't too excited about Violet's story. It's Lily's sister's story in this book, but I love this book just as much. Like in the middle of the book, I realized I felt a little bit guilty towards Lily and Nick from the first book because I loved them so much, but I was so invested in Violet and Xavier's story, and I was like, oh, this is so silly. I don't need to feel guilty towards fictional characters. But yeah, I really enjoyed The Partner Plot as well. And these were all books by authors I've read before, but they weren't as, I think I liked the other books by these authors, like Tia Williams, I think it's 7 Days in June. That was one of my favorite books of 2023 that I read, and this was her new book, and it was still an interesting read, and there's a lot of important things to read about it, but something I just didn't connect as much with these characters. And there's also sort of a, not time traveling, but there's like a fantasy element because there's two parallel timelines, modern day and Harlem during like the Harlem Renaissance, which was such a really interesting time period to read about. But the fantasy or like the mystical aspect, magical realism maybe, aspect that connects the two timelines was a little hard to get into. And then Sophie Cousins as well. I've really liked the two other books I've read by her, The Good Part and what was the other book? This Time Next Year. I really liked those books, and this one just didn't hit with me as much. And then the next category is like the Fated Mates category. So this is a romance book podcast that I listened to, and Julie Garwood was one of the episodes they did a focus on because she recently passed away. So I read some Julie Garwood books, and they're very like, I could see how people would think the main character, the heroine, is annoying, because it's definitely a very interesting writing style and an interesting character, but I had fun with them. They're just like quick reads. And then these two were also mentioned in episodes of the podcast. And then coming to the end, my favorite book from March was The Foxwife by Yangsze Choo. I adore her other two books, The Night Tiger and The Ghost Bride. And I think The Foxwife might be my favorite. I'm not sure. I do love The Ghost Bride a lot, and The Night Tiger too, but The Foxwife was so good. I really liked it. I listened to it on audio because I signed up for like an Audible subscription trial just so I could finally read this book, because the wait list would have been way too long. And the author narrates the book, and she is such a good narrator. Her voice is so soothing to listen to. The Foxwife takes place in mostly China, but also a little bit in Japan as well. And the main character is a fox woman, so like a mythical creature who is a woman but can also take the shape of a fox. Or maybe she's originally a fox and she can appear as a woman. But yeah, the characters, there's two, like, I would say major storylines, like an older couple's story and the fox Snow, her story. And it's so good. Like the historical context and the story, everything is really, and the mythical aspects were so good. And the last book I finished in March was The Inquisitor's Tale, and it is I guess like an illustrated book. It's for young readers. It's a chapter book, but there are illustrations on the margins, like how medieval texts were illuminated to help tell the story. So this also takes place in the Middle Ages, and I got it because I wanted to look at the illustrations, which were lovely, but I actually really love the story as well. It's about three kids, misfits, I guess. They are sort of, because of different circumstances, they are separated from their families and they come together to form their own little like found family band, and they have a journey, they have a quest, and there's helpers along the way of their quest, and it's just a really heartwarming story. So it was a really good book to end on. And yeah, lots of books read in March. Obviously, many of them were like picture books or graphic novels or sort of smaller books or quick reads, but a lot was covered in March. And let's take a quick look at the yearly trackers. So in terms of goals, I did make some progress on my buddy reads, BIPOC authors, and some nonfiction. Still have yet to get on reading more books in Korean. Then I did cross up some of my TBR and made progress on the series. No dragon books this month, although there were dragons in the Hedgewitch of Foxhall. The Memories and Milestones page. And yeah, that's it. I think I'm not going to do the stickers for March because I'm just not feeling inspired to, basically, and it would fill up this page pretty quick. So I think we'll take a pause on the sticker spread, but I'm looking forward to keeping up with my tracker in April and then just doing a more relaxed journaling style for April, because I had a lot of fun doing this, whereas the like full spreads that I've been doing earlier this year were sometimes fun, but when I fell behind, it felt like a burden, like I was like dreading catching up. So now that I know I'm gonna do this loose style, I'm like looking forward to working in my reading journal again. That wraps up my March reading wrap-up video. I am excited to keep reading some graphic novels in April. I already have a few checked out. And do let me know what you are reading or if you have any recommendations. I really appreciated the recommendation from Man Called Uve. Really enjoyed that book, listening to it. And my recommendation for you from March would be The Fox Wife. That was my favorite book of this month, and I'm excited to reread it soon, actually. So I will catch you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.